We start with the beginning by giving you a heads up that there is no such thing as a perfect team, but I do inherently believe that there is such thing as a perfect team for the job. And we'll get through this from the bottom to the top, just as I was saying, like building a pair of pants. The clicker is a little bit not happy with me for some reason, but I'm working through it. Just like with a pair of pants, we're going to be starting from the very threads, which are the individuals in the team. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, how each of us looks like and how we get to be who we are. Now, on each of these slides, you're going to notice this kind of cinematics, which is basically going to tell you if you want to read more about this particular topic, just go to this resource, and you're going to find plenty of things to explore and find out more about, right? But we're going to start with individuals. So the first thing that we take into account when we think about us is the very genetics that we have. We might be more athletic, smarter, IQ, EQ, anything that puts in the matter, but this is what we get from all the way from our ancestors. And then we move over to the core personality. And that is the personality we develop from 0 to 7, 10 years at home with our folks, with our context. And that is going to be something that, like it or not, with goods and with bads, with trauma and everything, you're going to get with yourself throughout your entire life, and it's probably going to be the source of most of your problems in life. Spoiler alert. Now, on top of all of that, we move over to the last layer of the individual, which is the behavior. The behavior is what you're getting by interacting with all those amazing people around you. There is a saying that, tell me who your best friends are, and I can tell you a lot about yourself. Well, that stands true to the day, because the people that you interact with the most are going to have a distinct effect for the better or for the worse on how you evolve. So we talked a little bit about individuals, and we made them quite unique, but in reality, they're not that unique. How many of you are familiar with the DISC concept? Any? A couple? Amazing. So the DISC concept says most people, all people, can be broken down into 4 big categories. And you're going to notice a little bit, and I'm going to give you a small exercise. As I go through this and explain each of them, think a little bit of what Hannah is and of what Martin is based on their performances on the stage today and the way they interacted with you. And we start with the first big category, which is the dominant people. The dominant people are the people that are just going to go after it. You give them a task, you give them a quest, you put them on a path, and they're going to make sure that everything as they go through it, high energy, task-oriented, they're going to make sure they accomplish it. But at the same time, they're going to be the people that, like Darth Vader, they're going to say, you should be doing that when you're not doing your job properly, or you might be deviating from their view of a proper job. The second category of people are influential people. I do see myself in that category, but basically they're people with a lot of energy. Just FYI, I've slept for like 2 or 3 hours coming over from Romania, but they're very people-oriented. I like to be in the middle of all of you and be talking with you and be sharing ideas, be sharing what I'm doing, right? Those are the influential people. You generally want to put them in your team in places where you want to increase visibility, adoption, and overall drive engagement with the others around you. Now we move to one of my favorite categories, which is steady people. Steady people are going to be the people that are making sure that everybody in your team is happy. As a manager, I could not be happier than having 2 or 3 steady people in a team that are going to come in at the office and be like, hey, Ale, George and Alain no longer get together. They fought over this PR because there was like not great code review on it, and suddenly they no longer communicate with each other. These are the people that want to make sure that everybody at the table interacts nice with each other. The last category, which is conscious people, these are the people that you probably don't want to put on stage. Why? They're going to be doing a brilliant job at their desk, not being bothered by the world or by other people around them. They're going to be super focused on delivering. They're super focused on task-oriented problems, but they're rather low energy, and if they could, they would rather not interact with you unless absolutely necessary. Now, knowing a little bit how we build ourselves from the ground zero, then going into categories, we're going to be moving a little bit into the map of motivation. Anybody familiar with the map of motivation? Oh, great, I'm giving great content today here. All right, so the map of motivation says the following. Every single individual, no matter what, starts to do something, and they want to put some effort into it. And at the beginning, it's really fun, like starting to play the piano. You start pressing something, and it makes a sound. It's freaking fantastic. But then you want to make that sound nice, and it's not so great. So we're going to overlap a little bit, if the clicker wants me to, with motivation. I start with pressing a clap, hearing something, that's great. Now I want to sing for release. Suddenly, the results are not that great and my motivation just goes down. But the tricky part is that in all of this process, I'm going to go a little bit on the other side, maybe. Yep, in all of this process, the results are compatible. Now, as a team leader, as an engineering manager, the moment you're building your team, the moment you're bringing your individuals with you, you want to make sure that as they go through this process, especially in technology as developers, we have to learn a new technology every couple of months, a new paradigm every couple of years. You want to make sure that as people go through this process of putting in the effort and then not really seeing the results for quite some time, they get demotivated, and you want to make sure that you're able to intervene and do something about it at the right time. And in regards to that, we're going to be talking a little bit about understanding the motivation and how can you drive people to actually be motivated. Now, Harvard Business Review did a really nice study on 12,000 people, basically breaking down what kind of things motivates them in order to do their job better, to be better people, or in general, just to keep on moving. The first one was technology adoption. And as you could probably guess, those are the people that, hey, Martin, are you still here? Try out React Compiler and file out 4 or 5 bugs in the first couple of weeks because they haven't done a proper job about it. Moving on from that, we're looking at counseling and mentoring. You're going to find those great people that are ready to share their knowledge with everyone in the team, walk you through the process of how they've learned because they just get the satisfaction out of getting other people to understand that. The third one is quantitative analysis. You're going to see that a lot in data scientists, and you're going to see that also in product managers that are going to say to you like, hey, where is this decision fundamented in? Do you have the data to back this decision? Those are the quantitative analysis people that are driven by such tasks. The next one is managing people. I consider myself to be highly motivated by managing people. What does that mean? You love seeing the strategy of people, putting people together and figuring out how to polish, to move them, to put them around and make them interact with each other, build relationships so that they output fantastic results. Conceptual thinking is oriented around design and making sure that you build up new things and you think of innovative ideas to put out there. Enterprise control focuses on processes. You love putting processes in place for the company, for everybody around you. And that might be seen in vice presidents, CEOs, directors, and other people high level on the hierarchical schema. Creative production orients around making abstract thoughts into something gorgeously visual. You're going to find here designers, but especially illustrators, people that start from nothing and allow their imagination to grow and blossom. And last but not least, influence and communicate, kind of what I'm trying to do here by telling you all of this information in bulk. Give me one motivated person, and I can move mountains, even if they are silent all the time. That is a quote, well, why not quote myself? Basically, that's a quote from me. And in order to be able to understand that motivation and in order to be able to intervene at the moment where motivation hits rock bottom and results are just really starting to move forward, we're also going to have to look a little bit about the mindset of a person in your team. Now, in this world that we live in, we start from T0. If you remember that graphic with the behavior in the middle, with like the genetics part, genetics and behavior is like T0. This is what we get to start in the world. And this is great. Like, we don't really have a fixed mindset. We don't really have a growth mindset. We are just there for the ride. But in comes parents. And especially in countries such as Romania, where we lived under communism for so long, well, we have parents that really like it their way. If possible, let's not change anything to the world. There's a perfectly fine toilet working outside the house 200 yards in the back. Moving on, we get friends and teachers and the ones around you, which in theory should be influencing you positively into seeing the world as a better place, as what it could be, not necessarily what it should be. And we move over into the world of enterprise. And we have some ways of influencing our people and how they evolve in enterprise as well, in companies as well. And that is through training and exposure. But unfortunately, as we get older, we also get more and more comfortable. And that is where age and expertise come into sense. You're going to see that as people become experts in their field, it's going to be harder and harder to move and reinvent yourself and accept new ideologies in your life. Now, the balance that you have to strike as an engineering manager in general on these people is to figure out the right amount of exposing them to new conferences, new trainings, new technologies, and allowing them to deep dive into what they already have. Does all of this so far make sense? Show of hands? All right. So we've looked quite a bit on the individual part. Well, the clicker doesn't work again, but we'll get there. But not yet. This is just the individual part. Remember the analogy with the jeans? We started with the very basic threads. We know what the jeans are made of, but we have to move on and then move over to the actual fabric. We're not yet designing the jeans. We're just doing the fabric in the jeans. So we covered the easy part, I like to say it. We looked at individuals. We made sure we understand where they're coming from, what typology of people they are, how they would interact with each other, and very important, patterns of interaction between dominant, steady, influential, conscious people are recursive. You're going to see them arise again and again. And you might want to be actively looking at who you're hiring as you're building that team. For example, you're starting your own company, you want to get 2 or 3 engineers. If you get 3 engineers in the same team that are all dominant, care to guess what happens? You're probably going to spend half of your time on code reviews about how we should properly write code in order to get that product out there, instead of actually writing the code to get the product out there. Similar with influential people, we like talking a lot. The downside of that, we ain't working as much. So at the end, you want to make sure that you have the right mix of people in your team, and you screen and look at them into the interview process to make sure that as you build your team, you're getting all the necessary roles. So as we're talking about roles, we're going to be moving into designing the team as a unit. There's 2 ways to design a team, really. You just put it together, hire who is cheapest or who comes to the interview, or you can actually take the slow path, so to say, and go through the process of actively thinking what you need in that team. In order to be able to do that, I'm going to give you some more things that I'm applying on every single team that I'm building. As soon as the clicker works, okay? The 5 R's of a team. We'll go into each of them, and I'm going to explain to you with some statistical data. You can find a lot more on the Harrisburg University Charter, which explains in length all of these, but I'm going to give you like a short preview so you know what you can deploy in your own teams. The first one, clearly define the expected result. A team that exists just for the sake of existing will not output the result you're expecting from it, and that's just fair. Because if you haven't designed it for a clear result, it's not going to be able to fulfill that role. Now, in order to be able to have clear enough results, the human mind is very funny. You actually can't store more than 3 things in the front of your mind all the time. When you write code, if you have to remember more than 3 variables, good luck. You're going to find that quite difficult. Similar with results. If you're creating your team and you're telling them that they have to have more than a maximum of 3 results, chances are, along the line, you're going to lose some of them from focus because effectively, we cannot focus on more than 3 things at a time. Ideally, just pick one. Make sure that one gets right knocked off the ground and then move on to the next one. Moving on, we establish who is who, and we talk here about roles. I was just saying it's very important to have both official and unofficial roles. The team lead, the scrum leader, whatever, but also the devil's advocate, the cheerleader, or the person that gets out of the office every Thursday for a beer. Those are important things for a team, not only to exist, but to be able to exist consistently and safely. And we're going to talk in a little bit about basically the stages of a team, and we can pull in some of the role knowledge that we're getting from here into those stages. The third one is assign clear responsibilities and purpose. We started with the purpose of the team, we moved over to the roles, and now we have to make sure that every single person in that team knows what the hell they should be doing. Now, according to some statistics from Atlassian, 50% of workers don't exactly know how they impact, through their work, their team results or the company results. Which is like scary. If I told you like 1 of 2 people in this room have no freaking idea what they're working on or why they're working on it, what would be the purpose of it all, right? Up next, well, likely, people won't work to conflict alone. And we talk a little bit here about relationships. You're going to see this as a recurrent theme. And another study done this time by the guys behind Expensify show that 76% of workers actively avoid conflict of any kind. They would like to go around it, so your role as an engineering manager in designing this team that works, going back from the individual over to the roles and responsibilities, you have to actively manage how people get in front of each other, how they communicate, and when conflict arises, do not allow them to run away from it, because that is just going to brew further and further frustration inside the team. The next one is rules, ground rules. Whether you like it or not, everything works by a set of terms and conditions. Now, you can let these terms and conditions come across just naturally, and they're just going to come from the team. But at the same time, you want to be conscious about what these things are. And I highly recommend you to have a document for the team ground rules. They don't have to be very granular, very specific, but you do have to have some conventions on how you would be interacting with each other and how this whole team is supposed to be working as a mechanism. Now, we went through the 5 R's, and now we go, okay, we created everything we needed in order for the mechanism to run. The next thing we actually have to do is supervise it and see that it runs properly. And over here, you're going to find the 7 pillars of a team. Again, if you want to go even deeper into this topic, feel free to go in the book by Phil Gildart. It's an awesome book. You might want to read it. The first pillar is leadership. Now, leadership is simply about giving the direction and always keeping that direction clear. You know where you're going, you know why you're going, you know what you're building. And that is important, and we're going to come back to it again and again. Reiterate it as many times as possible, but every single time that somebody comes into the office, ask any of your employees, why are you doing this? They should be crystal clear on the why behind it and on the what. The second one is focus. Allow your team to focus. Whether by coming by their office every 10 minutes and saying hi, or just being loud inside the office, the more fragmented and the more apart your time is, the less you're going to be productive. And we're going to have to look at that in a couple of minutes in detail. Next up, as soon as my magic wand here works, shared resources. Another thing for supervising a hyper-productive team is making sure that you have a central place where all of your resources are going to be shared and where they're going to be available. Now, that's not Confluence. I'm sorry to say that if anybody works for Confluence, please fix it. But basically, you have to find a way where resources are easily discoverable, easy to find, and easy to interact with. The fourth one is ego check. Whether a dominating person, whether an influent person, or whatever in the middle, we all have our egos that we bring to the table. As an engineering manager, as a leader of the team, as a tech lead, as a person that everybody looks up to, your number one priority is going to be to make sure that these egos don't run amok, that you keep them in check and you keep an eye on them and you revisit that every couple of months, couple of weeks in such a way that we don't affect each other. Small group roles, we moved over from teams of, I've led teams of 40 people, I've led teams of 4 people. The difference between it, honestly, is having the belief and the trust that in those small groups, natural leaders and natural roles are going to emerge. Your role is to be there to facilitate those roles emerging, not to explicitly hand them to people. We move over then to efficient and constant communication. Well, 2 years ago, well, 3 or 4 years ago, I would say Slack was a freaking amazing tool for that. Now my Slack is like 50 unread channels all the day and probably 30 to 40 people just pinging me on some random stuff. It is communication. I'm not going to negate that, but is it efficient? I'm not so sure. Breaking down the ways you're talking to people and you're talking to others and making sure that you actually pick the right way for each of them is going to be extremely important. And last but not least, as soon as the clicker works with me, constant and enthusiastic effort. And we go back a little bit here to that part where we were talking about motivation. It is absolutely natural for people to go through phases of, I don't really give a shit, due to a project that just failed, due to a new technology that just came out and they don't have the energy to adopt it or anything else. Make sure that as you work with the people in your team, you understand what motivates them so you can actually do something about it when inevitably they're going to get at the point where they don't really give a shit anymore. From the 7 pillars of the team, of supervising the team, we move over a little bit to team life cycles. Has anybody else seen this before? A couple of people, okay. This is pretty standard in the industry, and we're all basically looking at this through the team life cycle stages. The first one is forming, just putting your team together, which productivity is not great, not terrible. There are a lot of people from a lot of backgrounds coming in with their best intentions, honestly, to build your product. As people start colliding and as conflict comes about, we start productivity plummeting. But this is basically the best stage to be in with your team. Why? Because this is the area where you actually start to influence and you are able to guide people into definitive roles and into definitive relationships with each other. So you move over slowly into norming, where in norming, we already know who the tech lead is. We know who is the expert in ESLint, we know who is the expert in compiler, or we know who to go to ask for tips and tricks on how to review PRs. That is the area where slowly we're starting to get those roles into place and the relationships between them. And every manager's wet dream, basically, is to have his team in performing as much as possible. And honestly, this is the whole job. Like, at the end of the day, if you can keep your team into the performing space as much time as possible, you are doing your job extraordinarily. The adjourning phase is slower to see or rarer to see, mostly due to the fact that the adjourning phase orients itself to the moment where a project dies or where a team is no longer needed. But your job as an engineering manager if you don't go through that phase, is to always introduce new elements in the team that bring you back into the norming stage. The secret to keeping your team productive and to having hyper-productive team is actually, well, in lack of a little bit of a better term, fucking around with things so that they can have to settle back down into their roles afterwards. Because people get bored. We like change, we like dynamic, we like stability, but the dynamic of boredom is not something that we are used to being in. And that's why, as a manager, you have to constantly keep things somewhat, and the secret here is the somewhat, interesting. We went over most of the things that we would take in order for a team now to be great. Remember the 5 R's and the 7 pillars that you should be supervising for a productive team. And now we're moving over to executing with focus. Now, in order to execute, inevitably, whether you're in a startup, in a middle company, or in a big company, you're going to have some processes into place. The number one advice that I can give you here is that the processes only make sense if they make you faster and better. And whether we're going into the space of picking up a methodology, which can be waterfall, agile, or shape up, this is the new trend here now, it really isn't that relevant. If you look across them, and I try to picture that as best as I can, they all go through similar phases. They go through a phase where you have no freaking idea what you're doing, and then you start crystallizing a little bit how you're gonna be doing it and how you're gonna get there, and at the end of this thing, you actually know what you build, and you're crystal focused on creating for that goal. Now, the difference between them is waterfall just tells you, you go all the way through the process as you're building the thing. Agile says every couple of weeks or a week, because why not, some manager thought about it, or 3 weeks because why respect any methodology, we just go with the flow. We're gonna look at things and we're gonna do another planning, do another grooming, do another thing where most of us get bored, but we plan it again, we get some lack of clarity again, and then we head towards that lack of clarity towards the end of the sprint as we strive to deliver some value. Shape up is similar. It just says, okay, for the first 2 weeks, we don't know anything, we don't do anything. We're just thinking about how we are gonna be building this thing. And then we focus on, okay, let's build this thing. But no matter the methodology that you work in, the important thing to realize is that people start from a place where they have no freaking idea what they're gonna be doing and how they're gonna be doing it, and move over to clarity zone. You just have to get used to either be able to go with unclarity for a couple of weeks until you get to the point where you can draw out the project, through 2 weeks or to a couple of days in Agile. Moving over, all levels of the team have complexity, but unfortunately, success looks different in each one of them. So as you build your team, there are a couple of basic needs that you're gonna need to be constantly looking for. And we went through them at high level, but I just wanted to give you like a reminder of the pyramid of things. Because we moved over from individuals, which are the threads in our genes, if you remember the analogy. We moved over to the fabric, which is the team itself. And now we're looking at the process that we're enveloping this fabric with, which is actually getting the genes in the form that they are, right? Each of the things in these pyramids are parts of the material up to the process of transforming it into genes. The individuals, they need career coaching, mentoring, feedback, praise, and they need it in their own way. It is irrelevant that you have an amazing way of doing feedback if people don't understand it. It is absolutely irrelevant if you praise people in a public group, but they're completely uncomfortable with it. You have to understand the individual, understand the typology, and understand how to reward them into their own system. Moving on, relationships, as I was saying, conflict is something that we avoid by nature. But beyond conflict, we have ownership, respect, trust. All of these things are not inherently going to be built well by themselves. Caring and looking for them proactively and trying to guide your team towards building these relationships, it's what your job as a manager or as a team lead actually is. And last but not least, as you have this piece of material, you want to know what exactly are you going to be using it. Because there's a huge difference in the material we're going to be using for a pair of jeans and for a scarf. And the idea behind it is to try to put the individuals, the threads, and the overall knitting of the material in such a way that it achieves your goals. Time, after all, is the ultimate resource. We have these amazing individuals. We have a team goal. We have relationships in the team. We are just looking at it, and it's great, and it still doesn't freaking work. Why? Well, probably because you have 6 meetings a day with different stakeholders that don't really need to hear from you that often, but just in case they might need something from us. This is where, from my perspective as a manager, I am managing time absolutely brutally. At the moment, I'm working across 3 time zones with Switzerland, London, and Romania. And basically what we do is, both me and my product manager, we are only allowed to drive meetings in this window of time here from 11:30 to 1 p.m., time in which we all agreed that if anything happens, if anything needs to be done, this is where we put it. Now, I'm not saying that 2 developers can go on the side and have a pair session of like 2 hours. That's their own thing, and they both agree to it. But me as a manager, I'm not going to drive group meetings, and I'm not going to let anyone else drive group meetings for my team outside of this specific focus area where we know we're going to be losing time. But even when you ideally look at time and make meetings that are obsolete, unnecessary, you still have to really be thinking of time. Because at the end, you might be thinking that all of this time is yours to develop, where it actually isn't. And the bigger the company, the worse this whole thing looks like. Because first and foremost, you're just going to be having some time running the business, supervising your systems, making sure that if something breaks, you're going to be jumping on it to fix it, responding to like day-to-day inquiries from developers or anything else. Up next, internal and external support. You can build the most amazing product, but if your clients, be them internal or external, don't understand and know how to use it, it's absolutely for nothing. So the whole idea behind it, whether through documentation, whether through calls with support, whether through calls to your clients, you want to make sure that your service is successful from the perspective of having the necessary support for people to get to their goal with your service or product. Up next, time off and unpredictable. AI hasn't yet taken my job or any of my developers' job. I don't think it will for the next 5 to 10 years because honestly, I don't think our leaders or our CEOs know how to tell us what to do. I have to figure out like 3 months. I have to sit in calls with them just in order to understand what's in their mind. I don't think AI is going to be doing a better job at that. And then me translating into what we're going to be coding in there is just as big of a problem for my team. So good luck AI with that from that perspective. But in the meantime, we're all humans. And working with humans implies that we're going to get sick. We're going to get into the mindset of, I don't really want to be working. Or we're just going to have a really bad night. Last but not least, we get to the actual work, which is the piece of time that you want to make sure is focused and directed into the right spot. And your North Star here is an absolute non-negotiable. Whether you're a team, you're a company, whatever you are, you have to have that utopia place you're working towards. Whether it's realistic or not, I don't know. That's your job to figure out. But every single team, every single individual should know what this North Star is and how are we planning to get there. And I just try to go over this a little bit. Basically, try to reiterate every single week for yourself and for your team. The why the hell are we building this? What, how is it gonna be looking, what we're building, what is the final output of what we're doing? And one thing that people ignore quite a lot is the when. Because sometimes, and not a few times, I've heard developers say, I don't think we should be building this now. The reason, well, why would they think otherwise? If you, from a perspective of an engineering leader, again, or manager, or business leader, do not make it very clear why you have prioritized this particular feature, this particular product, this particular service now in comparison to others, why would you want them to align behind a vision that doesn't have a clear timeline in their minds? So it's your job as a leader, as a technical leader, as an influent person in the team, to make sure that all of these three pillars are constantly covered in the meetings, whether you're doing a bug, whether you're doing observability work, or you're building a feature. All of these have to be grounded into the why, what, and when. Last but not least, the productivity of your people is mostly impacted by. Anybody cares to guess? Just shout it out loud. Sorry? Close? That sits over there in the top. Any other guesses? Close, sits there in the top. Well, I've got various responses to this from people as I was building this presentation. And there was like ES-linting, end-to-end tests, going out for a beer, making sure that the company has enough money to pay me at the end of the month, different things, right? But the number one factor that is impacting the productivity of your developers, according to numerous studies, and I do invite you to just Google search them and you find them, is sleep. The number one factor in a developer being successful in building something, whether it's fixing a bug, building a service, putting together architecture, or coming to give a presentation here, is sleep. Not sleeping consistently for 3 days in a row dumps your productivity by 60 to 70% and increases the chances of you making significant errors that would need rework and other time invested by 92%. Now, if somebody told me that I have a 92% chance of fucking something up when I put a service in production for 2 million users daily, I would probably go back and sleep for a couple of hours, or probably I should have slept a couple more hours before coming here to present this. But we keep it between us, Philip. All right. So we went through quite a bit of content today, and I know it's been gruesome, so to say. The reason why it's gruesome is because a team is like a living organism. It evolves over the time, it changes its requirements, it changes its individuals, and by the way, the manager might just do mojo jojo in order to keep you in the productivity area, right? But the important thing behind all of this is to keep in mind that there's a framework behind it. Fantastic, hyper-productive teams do not happen just because you put them together. They don't happen because you get individuals which are great at their technologies, at working, and bring them together. They're gonna happen with you designing with that in mind. So I tried to put here all the steps that we went through today. The first one is basically you want to start with your foundation. Spend some time in one-on-ones with your people. Try to understand from a perspective of personality, of interactions, what do they like? What do they get driven by? Why are they pissed off at the end of the week? The second one is create a culture and a mindset of growth. We've talked about basically the interactions, the relationships, the conflict that can happen. All of that is just mud. And imagine you being front in front with a person and a glass in front of it. Every single failed interaction, every single failed PR interaction, every single conflict basically throws some mud on that glass. It's your job as a manager to constantly come and put people in front of each other and wipe that glass from time to time, discussing their conflicts, their divergences, their points that they don't get well along. The third one is follow the 5 R's of productivity. Please go and read the book. It's a fantastic book. But basically, make sure, and I would say that the most important one in there is having active roles, and you as a manager realizing what are the roles of the people in your team. Because whenever you're going to lose someone, you want to make sure that whoever you hire in their place is someone that can actively take that role and be successful in it. Number 4, supervise the 7 pillars of teamwork. This is the ground rules of just keeping yourself in the game. It might not be needed all the time. If you're building a POC, an MVP, the supervising part might be obsolete. The thing that you want to be focusing on is making that great team and creating the 5 R's. But if you're in a mid to big range company from like 500 people and above, and you already start to have very well-defined structure and teams, you definitely want to keep all of those 7 pillars in check. And from time to time, just go mentally through them and see, what am I missing in this picture, and what haven't I been looking at for quite some time? Step number 5, adopt only processes that optimize your time. There isn't anything more important than your developers' time and your freaking time. Developers hate useless meetings. We hate useless meetings. Let's not make them happen just for the sake of moving along or getting along. Let's make it intentional. Try to make it intentional and see how that works and how it changes things. Step 6, over-communicate your North Star. There is no way you're going to be talking too much about your goal. Everybody wants to hear it. Everybody wants to know that their work is meaningful towards that North Star. So I highly advise you to over-communicate it. A weekly cadence is something that I generally find really useful. And last but not least, please keep in mind, sleep is really important fun. And if you don't get that sleep, the chances of you just creating more work for yourselves go through the roof. That's been it. Thank you very much to all of you, and hopefully you found it useful.
So we've got some questions in
Fantastic.
our app, Eventing app.
Yes.
So the first one, how to keep people motivated in an environment where priorities change every day and the work on one problem is constantly interrupted?
Absolutely. This is one that I've actually hit on when I first moved to Snyk. Snyk is a cybersecurity company. When I came into the team, I don't think they were getting one day of work focused, like for real. Our product managers, our engineerings were just changing our priorities from day to day like that, and we would find ourselves into code blue or code whatever. We had a couple of codes in there. Every so often, just dumping whatever we were working on. The first thing that I did, well, you haven't heard this from me if your manager gets upset, but I freaking ignored them for a month. The idea behind it is to try to figure out which things actually break image of your team, services in production, adoption of your product or anything else, and which are just noise. Because in reality, there's never going to be like 100% of high priority things to be working on. But you as an engineering manager have to somehow look through them and put aside those that are not relevant. And the only thing that I found really useful in order to be able to do that is just ignore them for quite some time and see on which of them your director or your VP or your CEO comes and knocks at the door. Those are probably the ones you want to be looking at and probably the ones you want to be keeping your team focused. And the other ones, you can probably safely ignore and just bulk do them every month or every quarter or every whatever. Does that make sense, and does it answer your question? Hopefully.
Probably, yeah. Okay, another one. Is there any good source, book or something about how to understand people, let's say for beginners in leadership?
For beginners in leadership. I think the best source that I can point you towards is, there's a site called 16personalities.com. I don't know if you've heard about it. You can either go through the free material, which is quite a lot on the website, or you can download their brochure. I think I paid like $18 for it. But basically, it goes through all the types of personalities that are out there, scientifically backed, and they break them down by motivation, by what makes them tick, and what makes them, and how they conflict with each other. For me, it was probably one of the best spent times as I moved over to management. Like the first thing, the most brutal way of learning is just being there with the team and hitting your head on the desk because you don't know how to freaking fix the problem. But 16 personalities was something that was really useful for me to get like the overall image of who can I be interacting with. More than that, usually when I start up with a new team, if people feel comfortable with it, we actually do that test together because they have like an associated test which tells the personality that you have. We do that test together and we share results between us to see what to expect from the other people in the room. I hope that is useful.
Thank you. Another one. In the pyramid, team was on top. Do you build it from bottom to top sequentially, or do you build it all at once?
Well, in an ideal world, you will build it from bottom to top sequentially. But we're not in an ideal world. And you're going to have to scale from 0 to 7 people, from 0 to 40 people in very short sprouts of time. What I would advise you is to prioritize time for that pyramid in order. Do not go to relationships or to team objectives before you actually got to know your individuals. You might have to do some dirty, cheap work on the other two while keeping business happy. But first of all, go to your individuals, understand them, make sure you know how it runs, and then afterwards move for clarity on the next level. But again, the reality says, as you're building a team, you're probably going to have to do a shitty job on all of them at first. All that I'm saying is that when you want to start prioritizing doing a good job on something, pick them into the order of pyramid. Base first, which is individuals, move over to relationships and how people interact, and then all the way at the end, after you know what kind of material you're working with, basically, look at team and how that team can achieve the success that you're looking for.
Thank you. And the last one here is, do you see a difference between willpower and motivation? How does willpower fit in building the team?
Yes, definitely. This is one that unfortunately as business leaders, we have very little insight into the interview process. Willpower is something that for some people is real and apparent very soon. Like you can read on them that they're full of life. They want to go for it. They just want the next cool thing to be building. They're just there and they have the will to do it. They still want to be building tech, right? And then there are people that sometimes they just seem that they're not even willing to live, let alone be building tech solutions or anything else. Now, the problem is, in the interview process, you get a very narrow window into seeing that person. And that person can fake the shit out of it. Whether it's enthusiasm, willpower, or whatever the hell, you can't really tell from that window of time how it is. But moving over, when actually working to them, that's when signs of a distinction between willpower, basically, and your capability to be motivated start to arise. And it comes usually from the fact that people that are low on willpower are not going to be motivated by anything. And when I say anything, I don't refer to anything work-related. You're not going to see them enthusiastic about seeing a new movie, about going to a beer with friends, about anything. That is the point at which, well, as a leader, I generally advise going to therapy because I'm genuinely concerned for the people in my team and I want to make sure that they're okay. But if you see that willpower non-existent, you're probably going to see it months into the employment, or you're going to see it after really tragic events for people, which unfortunately happen, that drive that willpower down. There is a difference between them, but the way you're going to be able to see it, or how soon you're going to be able to see it, is going to differ a lot. I'm not sure if I made that clear enough as an answer. Hopefully.
I think it was clear enough. I don't see any other questions here. So if you want to continue debating the topic of the talk, you can meet Ale outside at the speaker's corner. Thank you very much for your talk. And now we will have a lunch break.